hold the mic.
This is on, right?
Yes, perfect one.
Well, that's the one we got before lunch.
Last version of the communique?
Yeah.
What you said was, yeah, asking it. So we could go ahead, but there was one that you did what you said.
I wanted me to highlight this and this point, and whichever point you want to highlight. At the Antigua points. We'll start. Okay, thank you. You can hear me, right? All right, thank you. Good afternoon. I am assuming that the press had lunch and you're fine. All right. So we'll simply highlight some of the discussions and decisions which we had and we took during the meeting. As you know, we have with us the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, who is the past chair of the council, and the governor, Mr. Antoine, present. I will do a presentation on a few points, and I will also invite the Prime Minister to do likewise, and the governor, and then we'll entertain questions from yourself. So the Monetary Council received the Governor's report on monetary and credit conditions in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. The report assesses the recent trends in monetary and credit conditions within the context of the bank's broader objectives of ensuring the stability of the exchange rate and exchange arrangements and the stability of the financial system. The key messages from the report were monetary conditions were assessed to have eased during 2016 as the money supply continued to increase. However, credit conditions tightened as reflected in the contraction in credit and the widening of the commercial banks' weighted average interest rate spread. The exchange rate anchor remained stable and strong throughout 2016, supported by adequate foreign reserves. Exchange rate stability underpins monetary stability, thereby sustaining the confidence necessary for economic activity. And consistent with the global and regional trends, real output growth in the ECCU stood at 2.6% in 2016, compared with 2.8% in 2015. Having considered the monetary and credit conditions in the ECCU, the Monetary Council agreed to maintain the minimum savings deposit rate at 2% and maintain the central bank's discount rate at 6.5%. The minimum savings rate is the lowest rate commercial banks can offer on savings deposits. The central bank's discount rate is the rate at which the ECCB lends to commercial banks. In respect to financial sector stability, for the year 2016, the ECCU financial system was assessed as stable. And the resilience of the financial system to potential adverse shocks strengthened, and major risk to financial stability in the ECCU diminished. However, the banking sector continued to be challenged by structural vulnerabilities, including correspondent banking relationships. In keeping with its goal for maintaining financial stability, the ECCB would commence publication of a financial stability report annually. The report is aimed at identifying risk and vulnerabilities in the ECCU financial system, assess the resilience of the financial system to domestic and external shocks, and provide information on the soundness of the financial system and the various initiatives that regulators and governments are pursuing to mitigate risk to the ECCU financial system. And of course, as you know, the citizens of the Monetary Union have been raising concerns about bank fees and high bank fees and the varied types of bank fees. And what we have decided to do on the recommendation of the central bank is to publish the fees and charges for commercial banks by territory. So this will be placed on the bank's website. So in the case of, say, St. Vincent, all of the banks in St. Vincent, the fees, all of the charges will be posted side by side. So discerning clients of the banks can study them and make informed decisions on their own banking practices. In respect to fiscal and debt sustainability, the combined overall surplus in the fiscal operations of the ECCU member governments rose to 321.4 million at the end of 2016. That is from 107.8 million in 2015. The regional debt to gross domestic product, which was 79.3% in 2014, declined to 73.3% in 2015, and 72.5% in 2016. The fiscal position of member governments is expected to continue to strengthen. Gains are expected in tax and non-tax revenue as economic activity increases, and the citizenship by investment programs. Once investments proceed apace, then we will see continued positive results. I will now pass on to my colleague, Honourable Gaston Browne, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members of the press, I've been asked to speak briefly on the issues of growth and competitiveness, as well as the proposed legislative reforms. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank hosted the inaugural ECCU Growth Dialogue with social partners on the 1st of March 2017. The dialogue sought to create a unique opportunity for social partners to engage the Monetary Council on the issue of economic growth and to forge consensus on a plan of action for addressing growth, competitiveness, and employment within the ECCU. Now, we discussed a number of issues affecting the region, issues that impacted on growth, and there were a number of proposed strategies to deal with the various issues. So, for example, we looked at the whole issue of entrepreneurship, the need to increase entrepreneurship within the region, and to provide the appropriate training as well as funding mechanisms to support increased entrepreneurship within the region. And some creative ideas to include venture capital funding, crowdfunding, as well as angel financing were considered. And we also looked at risk affecting the region, to include de-risking, and a number of strategies were also recommended by the social partners to address those issues. It was agreed that the forum should be institutionalized and that we should ensure that there is consistent dialogue between the various stakeholders. Now, in keeping with its commitment to the implementation of the ECCU Growth Action Plan, the Monetary Council endorsed the collaboration between the OECS Commission and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank on the implementation of an ECCU Growth Action Plan. Also agreed to recommend that member governments appoint a focal point to coordinate the implementation of the Growth Action Plan, and agreed also to support in-country consultations in conjunction with the OECS Commission and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank on the Growth Action Plan. Council also agreed to urge commercial banks to increase lending to the private sector in an attempt to spur growth. We have seen a consistent decline quarter after quarter, year after year for several years in the amount of credit. And as we seek to achieve that minimum threshold of 5% growth in our respective countries, Council is encouraging the commercial banks to increase their lending. We're not suggesting now that they should take on unnecessary risk, but to take on prudent risk and to manage their risk and to ensure that they grow their portfolio. Because at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a shrinking successful institution. So we encourage the commercial banks to increase their lending to the private sector in an attempt to increase growth within the currency union. Council noted with increased concern the difficulties with payment settlement of traders selling agricultural produce to Trinidad and Tobago. Council further noted that the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank has submitted a proposal to the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago to resolve this issue and expressed the view that a resolution has to be found to this matter. Council urged that this long outstanding matter be resolved expeditiously. In the meantime, the Council member for St. Vincent and the Grenadines updated the Monetary Council on a solution that his government is advancing. And again, a number of creative ideas have been looked at, to include the possibility of both central banks holding some level of currencies of the respective regions, or territories, so that the central bank, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, could possibly hold some TT dollars, and the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago could hold some EC dollars to ensure that they can exchange currency to facilitate trade. I've been asked to speak briefly to the legislative reforms. At its 86th meeting held on the 21st of October 2016, the Monetary Council approved the establishment of a ministerial subcommittee of the Council, chaired by Council member for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to lead discussions with stakeholders on the proposed amendments to the Act and to facilitate the process through its enactment. To this end, a consultative and legislative drafting workshop was held on the 11th of April 2017 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. ECCU, Attorney Generals, Parliamentary Council, Financial Secretaries, and other representatives of the Ministries of Finance, representatives from the ECCU's Bankers Association, local banks associations, and representatives of the ECCB attended the workshop. The team discussed the policy issues related to the amendments, the concerns of the banking industry, and reached consensus on the draft amendments. I may add here that the amendments do not change the substance of the Act, but would have provided some clarification on various issues. The Monetary Council approved the amendments to the Banking Act 2015 and agreed to urge member governments to secure the passage of the amendments to the Banking Act 2015 by December 31st, 2017. Final issue here is that at its 85th meeting held on the 22nd of July 2016, Council took the decision to recommend to member governments that the legal responsibility for anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, AML-CFT, supervision and regulation of financial institutions licensed under the Banking Act, be transferred to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. The Monetary Council therefore approved the proposed areas of amendment to the anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism legislation, AML-CFT legislation, in Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, to transfer the regulatory and supervisory authority of AML-CFT for institutions licensed under the Banking Act to the ECCB. And emphasize here, referring to institutions licensed under the Banking Act, they will be transferred to the ECCB to cover AML's CFT supervision. St. Vincent and the Grenadines was not included because they have already made the necessary changes to the law. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So,
you want to announce the date of your next meeting?
Yeah, the date and venue of the 89th meeting of the Monetary Council, that will be done by video conferencing, and it will be held on the 20th of October 2017. So we now open the floor for questions. You ask us the easier questions, and you ask the governor the hard questions.
Exactly.
Good afternoon to the head table. I am Nestor Philip of Marking 2K4 Channel 5 News. Essentially, de-risking is a headache for all of us. What was the discussions like, or what were the discussions like around de-risking, and what was decided upon moving forward?
Well, I'm told that perhaps I should take this one. We did not enter into any extensive discussions on the issue of de-risking, but de-risking remains an existential threat to the region, and it is an issue that we continue to monitor and to advocate. In fact, the central bank itself, they have been providing advocacy on the issue of de-risking in the various fora, certainly within the multilateral institutions, the central bank governors, and similarly, as the lead head responsible for de-risking, I've been doing likewise to advocate in the various fora within the region and globally. And we are continuing to ensure that at least we stop or at least cease the rate of de-risking within the region. And I believe we have made some progress, even though it still remains a threat. We're looking at a number of possibilities to manage this risk, or at least to mitigate it. A number of ideas include the creation of a corresponding bank that is owned by Caribbean interests that could operate in the metropoles, primarily in the United States. That is where we seem to have a major issue, so that they could clear transactions of banks within the region. We have also been successful in assisting a number of banks that have been de-risked to get what we call second-tier banks to provide corresponding banking for those banks. And at the same time, the central bank has recommended that there should be an amalgamation of banks within the region so that they can scale up and at the same time they become more bankable. Because the problem with de-risking is that the corresponding banks have suggested that the transaction size and the volume of transactions, they're too small, and therefore it is unprofitable. And when you look at the inherent risk associated with providing corresponding banking solutions for banks, they are saying that the risk is not worth the business, and that is why they have taken the decision to de-risk. So the central bank rightfully has suggested further consolidation of banks within the region, and that will help to resolve the issue of de-risking. And there's some other strategies, but again, I imagine there are other questions to be asked. So unless you'd like to know, I'll just turn over to the chairman so that someone else can ask probably a question on another issue.
Just to say also that there's this myth that de-risking is only affecting the Caribbean region. This is a global challenge. Within the developed world, the banks are exercising that action.
Sure.
And for us, it is being felt much stronger because we're small economies. And we have to rely exclusively for our foreign transactions on the US dollar. So it is not a matter that is unique to us in the Caribbean region. This is a global threat. And there are discussions taking place in various regions on how we can counteract and how we can seek to get a better understanding of it and put an end to it. But it's a major challenge, and this is why we are saying that we need to, all of us need to join forces, because no one country can counteract the challenge by itself. So I really want us to be very responsible in the way we speak about this matter publicly, in the way we broadcast and we publish matters relating to this issue, because it has the potential of really bringing our economies to a halt. Thank you.
I have another question, if you don't mind. We see the phasing out of the 1 cent and 2 cent pieces, if you will. And Governor, you called for there to be more digitized transactions, and of course, you all are looking at that. Is there a strategic action plan towards more digitized transactions to encourage people to engage in more digitized transactions? And of course, with more digitized transactions comes the whole question of cybersecurity. What is the bank's take on that? And Prime Minister, Chairman, could you tell us also what is the Council's take on the whole question of cybersecurity?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, cybersecurity is actually one of the top issues facing central banks all over the world, including the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. We have been involved in a number of international fora on this issue of cybersecurity. Only a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting of all security chiefs of central banks in the CARICOM area. And we hosted them at ECCB, and that was one of the main issues that we discussed. So it is an issue. We've seen recent events which point to the need for us to pay close attention to that. We've also strengthened our internal IT department as a result. At the moment, we've established an internal working group inside of the central bank to look at this issue of fintech, financial technology, and the whole question of digital payments. We have, in fact, already been approached by certain entrepreneurs to consider certain pilot projects, and we are examining that. What we've done is to reach out to people like the Bank of Canada, which has also done a lot of research in this work, to see what lessons they've learned and to determine how we should position the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and the currency union. So right now we're doing our homework, basically, and we will in due course sort of set out what our plans are. But the bottom line is that people want their monies faster and they want to pay less fees. So we recognize that there is some value there. But of course we have to take the requisite safeguards in respect of cybersecurity. And all of those things are being considered before we come to the public with well, actually to the Council first, and then with a Council approval to the public on our strategy for digital payments and so on.
I have a follow-up. I'm aware that when one orders an item, say on Amazon, the system is already in place so that payments are always facilitated. If, for example, I were to do the same thing on Dominica and put something, say a localized website for Dominica products to be exported via the internet, is the legislation in place to basically facilitate payments so that an American, the other way around, an American buying some product on Dominica via, let's say, Dominica's version of Amazon, is the legislation in place to help the entrepreneurs? I'd like to hear from the Council Chairman on that.
Well, Council Chairman asked me to make the initial response. We are looking at the payment system legislation in the ECCU. Under law, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is responsible for oversight of the payment system. And your question is quite interesting because what really is required now is a modernization of the system to allow e-commerce to take place both ways. Not just us buying from Amazon, but they being able to buy from Dominica or any country in the thing. The truth of the matter is that we do not have all of the infrastructure in place yet. And the law needs to be modernized, including recognizing digital payments. Because you would be surprised to see the law right now basically refers to paper money. And digital payments and electronic payments are not recognized. So that has to be changed. So there will be some revisions to regulations. As we speak in the central bank, we've commissioned a review of our payment system. We got the first report, and we are working, collaborating with the World Bank to modernize our payment system legal framework, which would address the concern that you just raised.
Good afternoon, Gavin Richards, DBS Radio. Earlier on it was mentioned that the ECCB is looking at 5% growth. I just wanted to ask, in terms of so many countries now having to build resilience to climate change, what sort of impact do you think that will have on being able to achieve that 5% growth?
Well, you have a number of issues which, as we indicated this morning in our presentations at the opening, which are constraining growth within the Monetary Council. And our susceptibility to external shocks and also natural disasters. I mean, if you take Dominica, for example, the tremendous 90% of our GDP was affected by Erica. And the sheer cost of replacing damaged infrastructure, we've had to divert resources to rebuilding rather than to build. And while you will see some growth as a result of the construction, the booming construction, but that in itself is not even getting anywhere close to the 5% that you expected. We also have the issue of productivity. We have to address the issue of productivity within the workforce in the monetary union. So we have to deal with this issue. The issue of access to funds. You see, the banks have money, but they're not lending to people. So there is an excess liquidity, but it's of no value to anybody except the banks themselves. And you really look at it, there's no real tangible benefit to the banks in that regard. So we have to address a number of issues. Infrastructure. We have to build a more resilient infrastructure. We have to build an infrastructure that can sustain the kind of activities which would usher in the 5% growth that we expect. But we're also constrained by our debt. We have to push towards achieving 60% of debt to GDP by 2030. But government's access to funds is highly limited. And if you borrow, then you increase your debt to GDP ratio. You may have a difficulty in repaying because you're not bringing in sufficient funds into the treasury to be able to sustain that debt. So there's some structural constraints which we have. But I believe if we can address the issue of productivity, if we can cause our countries to be more efficient, if we can deal with the issue of the ease of doing business, we have to look at these reports which the World Bank publishes every year and to really spend time to addressing the ease of doing business, because in our region things take too long to happen, and with delay of execution of certain actions, then we are also impacting our ability to grow. But that notwithstanding, I think with the growth action plan that we have, we'll be looking at, and which will be taken to the various publics, because that growth action plan will need the understanding of all the stakeholders. The unions, for example, there are times the unions will ask for salary increases when the governments cannot even maintain the existing wage bill. You see, there are delays in paying of salaries. The governments have to borrow to pay salaries and so forth. And on top of that, you're asking for a salary increase. And how do you sustain these unsustainable wage bills? And how productive is that labor force? If you invest $140, $200 million in the public service insofar as salaries are concerned, what is the return on that investment? Okay, so we need to get the understanding of the unions. We have to get the understanding of the private sector. We have to get the understanding of the banks and the wider public to understand that if we're to attain a 5% growth in our economy, to increase the opportunities for jobs, to increase economic activity, then there's some actions which we'll have to take, in my respectful view, which may not be necessarily popular, in the initial stages, but certainly we have to look at these issues if we're to really achieve the 5% growth. Yeah, sure.
On the issue of climate change, you would recognize that our respective countries are transitioning into alternate energy, to green energy. I know in the case of Dominica, you were looking at transitioning into geothermal, and certainly in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we are doing a combination of solar and wind. In fact, by the end of this year, we would have invested $100 million in energy security to transition from fossil fuel to green energy. And the whole idea is to eliminate the volatility in petrol prices. I mean, that in itself is an impediment to growth, and obviously is linked to climate change. So all of our countries are looking at transitioning into green energy as we seek to mitigate against some of the risk of climate change, which are not entirely in our control because we are very small emitters. And as you know, there are major polluters even in this hemisphere, one of which, a country which recently withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. But generally speaking, I think that, as was said by the chairman before, we're seeing an uptick in growth. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we did about 6.7%. Governor, I understand that is the revised growth figure for Antigua and Barbuda for 2016. So already, notwithstanding the challenges, we have the capacity to achieve that 5% that we had set sometime before. The issue is about the sustainability of maintaining that 5% minimum growth.
Earlier on, it was mentioned that international events such as Brexit and also the healthcare programs in the United States could have some sort of impact on the ECCB. I'm asking, what sort of impact do you think regional events, like for example, what's going on now in Barbados and the fluctuating TT compared to the US dollar in Trinidad and also in Jamaica, what sort of impacts do you think this could possibly have on the ECCB?
Well, certainly as a CARICOM region, whenever any one of our member countries is challenged economically, it tends to have an effect on most of us. For example, in the case of Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago, they are known to be very important source markets for tourism in many of our countries. In other words, quite apart from what tourists we get out of North America and Europe, the Caribbean itself is an important source market for many of our countries. And in that regard, Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago are very important contributors to that. So obviously, if there's less disposable income, if there's depressed economic activity, it's likely to affect the ability of these citizens to be able to travel to the different islands in the ECCU, for example, to take holidays, to spend money, and to do business. As a region, we are always concerned about the extent to which these things can affect our trade arrangement. In the case of Trinidad, again, which is one of the largest economies, the issue of demand from us They buy a lot of our stuff. We sell a lot of produce, whether it's agricultural produce, other things. Of course, we buy a lot from them as well. So any economic downturn there can have an effect on demand, which then adversely impacts our own economies. So that's the concern that we have about the situations going on in those countries. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Kuvia John from Vibes Radio. It was reported that the bank had made a profit in the last financial year after 3 years of registering losses. What do you think contributed to those consecutive losses, and what has the bank done differently to help them register a loss in this past year?
Okay, I guess this one is for me. So, well, I've spoken to this matter before. In terms of the losses, a big part of it had to do with the low interest rate environment. So the ECCB invests a lot of its reserves in the U.S., in the foreign, U.S. foreign securities market, because obviously that's where we need to keep most of our reserves because of our peg to the U.S. dollar. As you know, the Fed had cut interest rates to 0, and for 7 years they were at 0, and they've just only recently in the last 6 months raised the rate 3 times. So during that period, our reserves were getting very low interest, less than 1%, and that had a direct effect on interest income. That is starting to come up. We're starting to see interest rates go up slowly, so that is going to positively affect our income. But on the expenditure side of the bank, we've done a number of things. For example, we have changed our telecom system to make it cheaper for us, and that's important for us because we're a regional central bank. We have 8 members. We make calls to all our members every day, and of course we speak to people all over the world. We cut that down. We have taken other internal steps to look at our own cost efficiencies. And we are doing more so that a combination of income and expenditure is what has helped us to be able to begin to see an improvement in a profitability.
Good management.
Gentlemen of the head table, you all are at the helm of a $17 billion economy. The whole question of minimum wage, Prime Minister and Chairman, I know, of course, on Dominica, there has been talk about it. Back in about 2008, some progress made. In 2017, where are we when it comes to minimum wage and adjusting wages, if you will?
Well, each country has been looking at its own national situation insofar as minimum wage is concerned. And in the case of Dominica, we had made some progress on this, not only in the private sector but also in the public sector. And one of the far-reaching decisions which we took in the public service was that no employee in the public service should be paid less than $1,000 a month. And there were numerous employees within the public service who saw a jump in the monthly and fortnightly pay. And we also increased in the various categories as recognized by the legislation. We have been having discussions within the cabinet on a possible review of the minimum wage, but no definitive decision has been taken. I believe we may want to leave this to the discussion on the growth action plan, because we will have to take this thing in a holistic fashion and to see what kind of contribution that decision would have in respect to growing the economy. Because yes, we can increase the minimum wage, but that also can have an impact on companies' profitability and what happens if profits go down. The very same people whom you try to give an increase in salary, next they may have no salary at all. So I would respectfully recommend to us in the OECS that we should leave that discussion as part of our consultation on the economy and the growth action plan, which we have approved to engage the various stakeholders within the monetary union.
Prime Minister, as a follow-up, the issue of income inequality, will the Growth Action Plan ever see that issue being dealt with, solutions-wise? Well,
I am sure the media will be one of the major stakeholders, and we'll all have an opportunity to raise those issues, which will all be taken on board. And as I said, in my respectful view, and I believe that of the Council, that we need to have those things discussed within a plan and not outside of the plan, because there's a strategy, there's a plan. We now have to share it with the public, get their feedback, get their recommendations, their suggestions, and to come back taking all of those points into consideration and to see where we can place them and what impact they will have on our onward march to having a more sustained and higher growth rate within the monetary union. Okay, thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful evening and a blessed weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Head to a funeral.
Yes.